Hello everyone, it's me, So for those who don't know, I make analog horror videos. You know, those generic videos where they're like,
oh my fucking god, Mark's Pizzeria! Holy shit, yeah! Wait, what? An EAS warning? What? Oh my god! A face! Ah!
Yeah, those kind of videos. But do you ever want to know how I make my analog horror videos? No? Well, fuck you, I'm gonna show you anyway. I've actually had this idea for an analog horror tutorial video at the back of my mind for a while, but I never considered making it. Because at the time, I was still making analog horror videos where I basically just downloaded images from Google and applied a VHS overlay over it. Something which I guarantee any KineMaster editor would already know. But looking back on how much my analog horror videos have changed over the years, quality and production-wise, I feel like that now is the right time. So you know what? Let me show you how I make my analog horror videos. Bitch! So obviously before I do the whole making, editing, blah blah blah, I have to plan the analog horror project first. When making an analog horror video, you don't just go and make one willy-nilly for views, or because you just saw a local 58 episode with 2 million views or something. Like the majority of the analog horror fanbase. You have to plan your project first, like what will your analog horror video be about? And most importantly, how are you gonna make it scary? So here's how I plan my analog horror videos. So what I do is that I open up a notes page on Samsung Notes and I write down the, as I like to call, main points, which is basically the key points of what will happen in the video. And then in between these main points, I improvise and I do whatever comes to mind. I know this is such a weird way in developing analog horror videos, but I quite like doing it that way, because most of my tropes you see in my analog horror videos was completely improvised. Everything you saw in the endings of the Grandfather's Companion BBC broadcast and Child Abduction Emergency BBC broadcast was actually improvised. Neither of these endings was ever intended or planned or anything. And they turned out really well in my opinion, especially Child Abduction Emergency BBC broadcast. That episode is probably my top favourite BBC Horror VHS episode I've made. So, in my opinion, if you want to make analog horror videos, I'd say definitely plan your projects and improvise at the same time. Okay, moving on. So after I have finished planning my analog horror video, I then move on to creating sets from scratch using simple Sandbox 2. Which is basically Garry's Mod, but for phones and tablets. So let me show you how I make these sets on Simple Sandbox 2. So firstly, I obviously have to develop the set itself. Duh. I can make almost anything on Simple Sandbox 2. No dicks, unfortunately. But for the sake of this video, I'm just gonna create a little street. So just for the sake of this video, I'm gonna make this a basic street, a couple of houses and road pieces. Once I'm done making the sets and finished adding a few finishing details here and there, I then open up Xrecorder, turn off the UI on Simple Sandbox 2, choose a perfect angle, and then I take a screenshot of the sets, or a screen recording depending on what type of scene I'm doing. And then that's it really. Some people may view my Simple Sandbox 2 methods and think,
oh, you're so fucking lazy, you can't even animate, you fucking loser.
But in my opinion, I really like using Simple Sandbox 2 to make analog horror videos. I think it's a great way to make analog horror videos if you don't know how to animate, like myself. Or people who struggle at maths, like myself. Or people who have had a breakup with their boyfriends like myself. Or people who struggle to make new friends like myself. Why the fuck am I still alive? Also, the sets always come out really nicely when they're done, and they look even better when they're edited in my opinion. So, yeah. That's how I use Sandbox 2 to make analog horror videos. Now, time for the fun part. Okay, we've covered the planning stage and the set making stage on Sandbox 2. Now it's time for the final stage.
Editing the bitch.
Now, I would show you how I edit a full-on analog horror video, like how I make the island themes in BBC Horror VHS, but there is so much editing involved, and each analog horror video I make has its own individual style of editing, I would say. Like, one analog horror video could have a lot of animation in it, and then another analog horror video could have no animation in it, and then one analog horror video could have jump scares, and then another analog horror video could have no jump scares at all. It's quite a mixed bag when I make analog horror videos. There's just a fuck ton of editing involved that I think that deserves a video of its own someday. So for now, I'm just going to show you a few of my tricks I do when I edit my analog horror videos, as well as a few tips. So we're mainly going to focus on how I prefer to create the VHS aesthetic for my analog horror videos. Now, every analog horror creator has their own personal preference on how they choose to create a VHS aesthetic, whether it would be using a real VHS recorder to using packs. But for me, I like to
saturate colours
and use real VHS overlays. Now here's how I create my VHS aesthetic. So firstly, I select every image, screenshot, and screen recorded clip on the KineMaster projects for the analog horror video. I then go to the adjustments tab, and I basically just crank up the contrast, saturation, and vibrance tools to 100%. I then turn up the brightness to whatever number, depending on what the images and screen recordings will look like when I have turned up the contrast, saturation, and vibrance tools. And voila! I have a saturated as fuck image. Next, I apply some effects. Hey, that rhymed. So before I apply a VHS overlay, I use a couple of KineMaster effects to basically try and give the analog horror video its crusty quality and muted color, which is a typical thing you normally see in VHS. And the KineMaster effects I use are the sharpen effect, the dust storm effect, the digital crash effect, the ferrogram effect, and the split spectrum effect. Now, when I begin applying the effects, I go in a specific order. So firstly, I apply the thermogram effect, and I lower the opacity down to approximately 15%. Next, I apply the sharpen effect, and I change the shape of the effect into a rectangle. I then increase the sharpen strength to 50%. I increase the smoothness to 10%, and I set the distance to 100. Then number 3 is the dust storm effect, and I decrease the strength of the effect to 10%. I set the angle of the effect to 14 degrees, and I increase the fade of the effect to 10%. For effect number 4, I apply the digital crash effect, and I just decrease the strength of the effect to 10%. And finally, I apply the split spectrum effect, and I disable the movement animation, I set the distance to 1, I turn up the scale line, and I lower the opacity down to 50%. And there we go. That's it. Then, once I've finished applying the KineMaster effects, I then apply my VHS overlay. Now, you would think I would just lower the opacity down, right?
No!
The way I apply a VHS overlay is that I turn on the blending tool, and just like with the images, screenshots, and clips, I increase the contrast, saturation, vibrance, and brightness tools, and voila! This is how a finished analog horror video normally looks like. Now, one more tip. If KineMaster crashes, give up. Okay, and that's pretty much it. That's how I make analog horror videos. There's not really much to say, so I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna go now. Yeah, I'm going. Bye.